Looking for magic cards? At flipsidegaming.com you can now use the promo code LVD to get a 10% discount on orders over $10 while supporting the channel at the same time. Hello and welcome to another episode of Wacky Wednesday, a weekly series where we explore wacky deck ideas in both standard and modern, and this week we're taking a look at Shadow Elementals in modern. This is a creature combo deck that aims to kill the opponent on turn 3, and in order to do that we have 3 different creatures. The first one is Nivmagus Elemental, a 1 mana 1/2 that says exile an instant or sorcery spell you control, and then put 2 +1/+1 counters on Nivmagus Elemental, and of course that spell won't resolve. So a pretty strange ability, but it combines very nicely with our various cheap spells, especially our 1 mana Phyrexian spells. We've got a total of 12 1 mana Phyrexian spells here in Surgical Extraction, Mutagenic Growth and Gutshot, which we can all cast by paying 2 life rather than paying their mana cost. So all of those spells combine very nicely with Nivmagus Elemental, because they basically read pay 2 life, put 2 +1/+1 counters on Nivmagus Elemental, and when you're trying to be fast, there's no better way than free. So the text box of those various Phyrexian mana spells doesn't really matter, since we're just gonna exile them with the Nivmagus Elemental, but of course there are situations in which you actually want to cast a spell instead. Our next creature is Kiln Fiend, which combines very nicely with Nivmagus Elemental. Kiln Fiend is a 2 mana 1/2 elemental beast that says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Kiln Fiend gets +3/+0 until end of turn. So it doesn't matter whether or not the spell resolves, as long as you just cast the spell, Kiln Fiend will get the bonus, which means you can always just exile the spell with Nivmagus Elemental to give it the 2 +1/+1 counters. Kiln Fiend will still get that +3/+0 bonus, which is all that matters. And then our final piece of the puzzle here is Death's Shadow, a 1 mana 13/13 that gets -X/-X, where X is your life total. And in a deck with all these fetch lands, shock lands and Phyrexian mana spells that make you pay life, Death's Shadow is going to be very big very quickly, and you'll be able to deploy it right away. So these are the creatures that need to get the job done. Then the rest of the deck is mainly Phyrexian mana spells, ways to protect your creatures and ways to pump up your creatures to speed up the clock. So let's take a look at the entire deck, starting out with Surgical Extraction, a card you typically see in sideboards, but we're playing 4 copies main deck here. So this is a Phyrexian mana spell that we can cast by either paying 1 black mana or 2 life. And then the effect reads, choose target card in a graveyard other than a basic land card, search its owner's graveyard, hand and library for any number of cards with that same name, and then you get to exile those cards. So it can be a very powerful effect against some combo decks that rely on a number of cards, or against graveyard decks, but most of the time we will just be exiling it to a Nivmagus Elemental. Important to note here that you do need a target in a graveyard in order to cast the Surgical Extraction, which sometimes can be a problem because Nivmagus Elemental does exile the cards you play. So you do need something like a fetch land in a graveyard in order to cast the Surgical Extraction in the first couple turns. Next up we have 4 copies of Tainted Strike, which is a 1 mana instant that says target creature gets +1/+0 and gains infect until end of turn, and of course we only need to deal 10 poison damage to an opponent in order to win the game, so this kind of gives our creature double strike, but it's even a little better than giving our creature double strike because of the +1/+0, which adds up very nicely with our Nivmagus Elemental, which has base 1 power and gets increments of 2, so the +1/+0 from Tainted Strike actually is very relevant. Next up we have some hand disruption in the form of Thoughtseize, which also lets us lose 2 life, which combines nicely with Death's Shadow. Then we have 4 copies of Gutshot, which lets us deal 1 damage to target creature or player, but most of the time we'll just be exiling it to Nivmagus Elemental. And next up we have 2 copies of Ground Rift, which is a pretty strange one that you don't see very often in Modern. A 1 mana sorcery that says target creature without flying can't block this turn, but the important part here is that Ground Rift has Storm, so when you cast Ground Rift, copy it for each spell cast before it this turn, and you can choose new targets for the copies. But the important part about Storm is that it combines nicely with Nivmagus Elemental, since all those Storm copies you can also exile with Nivmagus Elemental to give it additional +1/+1 counters. So you want to cast Ground Rift in the same turn that you've cast a whole bunch of Phyrexian mana spells, because that way you get to grow the Nivmagus Elemental a whole bunch. And next up we have 4 copies of Mutagenic Growth, another 1 mana Phyrexian spell, giving target creature +2/+2 until end of turn. So if you don't have a Nivmagus Elemental in play, this is probably the best Phyrexian mana spell, because it actually does something relevant, and of course combines very nicely with Death Shadow, because it can give your Death Shadow +4/+4 out of nowhere. Next up we have 4 copies of Apostle's Blessing, which costs 2 life and 1 mana, and gives target artifact or creature you control protection from artifacts or from the color of your choice until end of turn. So this is a nice way to protect our creatures from spot removal spells, but we can also use it to make our creatures unblockable if the opponent only has creatures from one particular color. Next up we have 2 copies of Temur Battle Rage, a 2 mana instant giving target creature double strike until end of turn, and if we have Ferocious, meaning if we have a creature with power 4 or greater, then it will also give that creature trample until end of turn, which is very relevant if the opponent has a bunch of chump blockers. And then finally we have 3 copies of Dismember as our removal spell of choice, another Phyrexian mana spell. With this one we have a few more options in how to cast it, and we can actually pay the black mana for Dismember, unlike the white mana on Apostle's Blessing or the green mana on Mutagenic Growth. And this one gives target creature -5/-5 until end of turn. Dismember is very useful against the various delve threats like Tassiger or Gurmag Angler, which you cannot kill with a card like Fatal Push. Then quickly going over the mana base, we've got a total of 12 fetch lands, 4 Marsh Flats, 4 Bloodstained Mire and 4 Arid Mesa, although the Arid Mesa should probably just be another black fetch lands, since we don't have any mountains in the deck that we want to fetch, but we do have 1 Swamp, and then we also have 4 Blood Crypt, which is the mana producing land for the deck. Then quickly going over the sideboard, we've got 2 copies of Duress against combo and control decks, got 2 copies of Fatal Push if we need access to a cheap removal spell. We've got 2 copies of Collective Brutality, mostly against the burn decks. We've got 2 copies of Postmortem Lunge, which is a nice one against removal heavy decks and can definitely take an opponent by surprise. Got 2 copies of Shattering Spree against artifact based decks. We have 3 copies of Pyroclasm against small creature decks, and 2 copies of Grafdigger's Cage, which also has a lot of application, mostly against graveyard decks. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the play, and this hand looks like a keep. We do have Nivmagus, a bit land heavy here with 3 lands, but I think we have to keep most hands with Nivmagus in it. And then it's actually interesting whether or not we run out Nivmagus on turn 1, since we would be able to protect it with Apostle's Blessing, but in the dark it's probably worth it to play out a Nivmagus. So let's go Blood Crypt, pay 2 life, run out Nivmagus and say go. And hope it doesn't get fatal pushed here. Alright, Mountain into Faithless Looting. So could be a Dredge deck, could be a Reanimator deck. And our opponent discards Is It Charm and Gristlebrand, so our opponent clearly on a Reanimator deck. We picked up a Gutshot, so let's see here. Let's start by fetching a Swamp. We can cast Gutshot for free, exile it with Nivmagus, then we can cast Tainted Strike, actually let it resolve. So then we'll have a 4-powered Nivmagus, and then we can cast Ground Rift, get 3 Storm copies, exile them all to Nivmagus, and that should be lethal. So let's cast Gutshot on our opponent by paying 2 life, and then exile it to the Nivmagus Elemental. Then cast Tainted Strike, actually let that resolve. And then Ground Rift. Get 2 Storm copies. Exile to Nivmagus. Exile to Nivmagus. Exile to Nivmagus. And that's a turn 2 kill. Awesome. So our opponent may be able to reanimate Gristlebrand on turn 2, but instead they just died to our Nivmagus Elemental. Awesome, on to sideboarding against a Reanimator deck. Probably wants access to Grafdigger's Cage. Duress probably good enough, and Collective Brutality should be decent as well. What don't we want? Probably don't need the Apostle's Blessings, and probably don't need our Dismembers. Our main deck Surgical Extractions should be pretty good, as we have one in our opener. So no creature threats could be a problem here, but we do have a ton of disruption for the opponent, so I think we keep this, but it could be wrong to keep this one, as we don't have any creatures here. But our opponent's gonna have a hard time reanimating anything here. So let's run out Blood Crypt, pay 2 life, and I think we start by Thoughtseizing rather than playing out the cage right away. Let's see, our opponent has Emrakul, the Aeon's Thorn, Goryo's Vengeance, Gristlebrand. We could actually take the Gristlebrand, let our opponent cast Goryo's Vengeance and then Surgical. Our other option is just taking the Goryo's Vengeance. That might be okay, since our opponent's probably gonna know what's up if we make them discard Gristlebrand. So make them discard Goryo's Vengeance. They could also have access to Through the Breach, of course, which is the other card we need to be worried about. Found our Dismember, which isn't gonna do much here. We probably want to Thoughtseize them the turn before they have access to Through the Breach. They also have a Simian Spirit Guide, so that can be a turn early. Let's run out Grafdigger's Cage for now, and run out a Blood Crypt, which I think we do take 2 damage here, as we do want to have access to Death Shadow if we draw it. Untap, find Mutagenic Growth, so do need to find a threat at some point. So this is probably where we need to Thoughtseize, since if they did pick up a Through the Breach, they might be able to cast it next turn. If they did not find Through the Breach, instead just 2 lands. So I guess we'll take the Simian Spirit Guide, since we can't take both threats, and they're both pretty problematic by themselves. So let's just hope to find a creature as soon as possible here. End of turn, I think we fetch just to thin out the deck a bit. Take 2. Untap. Gut Shot, so still no creatures here. So perhaps we should have mulliganed to look for a creature, since now if our opponent does top deck a Through the Breach, we're just dead. Opponent takes 2 from Watery Grave. And is this a Through the Breach? Sure looks like it. Yep. Alright, so let's see what our opponent's creature of choice is. I guess we can Surgical them before they deal lethal, just to take a look at their deck. So with the Annihilator on the stack, let's Surgical Through the Breach and have a quick look at their sideboard plan. So they have multiple Through the Breaches, Faithless Looting, Emrakul, Goryo's Vengeance, Gristlebrand, Jacerim's Prodigy, so might want to keep in some removal spells. Thoughtseize, Serum Visions, Lightning Bolt. So Lightning Bolt also a good one to know about. Alright, let's concede. And go on to sideboarding. So against Jacerim's Prodigy, probably want to keep in some Dismembers, probably better than Fatal Push. Want to keep Lightning Bolts in mind as well, so perhaps do want access to a few Apostle's Blessings, but probably not. And then keep in the Collective Brutalities. Yeah, I think we just run it back like this. And try to keep a less reactive hand. Our opponents might also be siding in answers to our Grafdigger's Cage now. We would like to be on the play. And this hand has a lot of threats, but not a lot of lands, but I think it's probably still a keep. We have some ways to reduce our life total with Thoughtseize, Gut Shots and our fetch land, so Death Shadow is going to be online pretty quickly, and we can lead with a Thoughtseize. And see a hand of Thoughtseize, Spirit Guide, Serum Visions, so I think we actually take the Thoughtseize here, since we don't want them to take our Death Shadow, and then leave them with a Serum Visions and a bunch of lands. Alright, our opponent exiling Spirit Guide to cast a Jacerim's Prodigy. Cannot Gut Shot that one. So can we find a fetch land? We cannot, but we did find a Nivmagus Elemental, which will play out here. So we can put 2+1/+1 counters on it with our Gut Shot. Opponent casts Serum Visions. Opponent with another Serum Visions. Untap, find a Grafdigger's Cage, so we can attack with our Nivmagus Elemental, our opponent can block with Jace and transform it, and then we can take it from there. Opponent does indeed block. no reason to go for the gut shot yet, I think. If we play out Grafdigger's Cage, our opponent probably is gonna go for the Through the Breach plan, which is probably fine here. So let's just run out the Grafdigger's Cage and say go, since we know our opponent's gonna transform Jace here anyways. Oh, well, never mind. They're gonna keep Jace unflipped. They're gonna activate it now. By playing Grafdigger's Cage, our opponent also can't flash back Serum Visions from the graveyard. And a second Jace, alright. And a Serum Visions. So our opponent getting a lot of card selection here. We just need to find a fetch land here. Alright, there we go. So now we have access to Kiln Fiends and Death Shadows. I think we start by running out a Kiln Fiend. I'm not even gonna bother attacking yet. Opponent pluses on Kiln Fiend. But we can just take it slow here. Untap, find a Blood Crypt, excellent. So now we can run out Kiln Fiend plus Death Shadow. And then try and go all in next turn. Opponent keeps plussing. And Thoughtseize. I think we let the Thoughtseize happen, don't want to respond with the gut shot, since then we miss out on a bunch of Kiln Fiend triggers. And they take the Tainted Strike, alright, that's fine. Get to keep our gut shots. And find another Kiln Fiend, so we might even want to run out another Kiln Fiend before going for the gut shot, since right now we're not going to be able to deal lethal with this gut shot. And their opponent's still far from actually through the breaching, unless they have a Simian Spirit Guide in hand. But now we can definitely attack with our creatures, and our opponent might be in an awkward spot when they're trying to block. And Jace Emblem is not really a problem here, so let's move to combat and attack with everyone at our opponents. And see how they block. Opponent puts Jace in front of Kiln Fiend. So we could just let damage happen, deal 4 to our opponent. I think that's fine. And then just run out another Kiln Fiend. And if we can find a non-creature spell next turn, we should be able to win. Gut shot might even be enough by itself. Does our opponent have Simian Spirit Guide through the breach? No, instead a Quicksilver Amulet. And that does play around our Grafdigger's Cage. So we do need to win this next turn here. Jace pluses on a Kiln Fiend. Untap, find Nivmagus Elemental. Attack with everyone at our opponent. Opponent blocks Nivmagus. So we can either gut shot ourselves or our opponent. Doesn't really matter with Death Shadow here. So let's just gut shot our opponent by paying 2 life. Pump all our Kiln Fiends. And that should be enough here. Opponent at 9, and that does it. Sweet, managed to beat Grixis Reanimator. On to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw, and this hand unfortunately doesn't have any creatures in it, so I don't think we can keep. So let's go to 6. And this hand's not ideal, but I think we'll keep. And Blood Crypt. Don't really need a second land, but it is 2 damage for Death Shadow. But I think we still bottom it, since we do want to find more action, or just more fetch lands, which are better than shock lands here. And let's say our opponent takes our Death Shadow or kills it, then we want to find a second creature as well. Opponent with a tapped Watery Grave, so probably not Grixis Death Shadow, and we find a Thoughtseize, excellent, so let's fetch shock and Thoughtseize our opponent. See a hand with Path to Exile, Lingering Souls, and Gideon of the Trials. Well, those are all problematic cards, but Path to Exile is probably the most problematic one. could take Lingering Souls and then Surgical it, but that seems pretty weak, so would rather just take the Path to Exile and then leave our opponent with Lingering Souls and Gideon, which are both 3-drops. Opponent with a tap Shambling Vent, which was the draw for their turn. Find another Death Shadow, which we cannot cast yet, even if we run out Surgical, since Mutagenic doesn't have any targets. So let's just pass the turn here. Opponent with Flooded Strand into probably Lingering Souls. Nope, they're going for Gideon instead. And they're gonna plus on our land, that's fine. Let's untap, find Arid Mesa. Alright, so now we can run out Arid Mesa, Fat Shock to 12 and run out 2 Death Shadows. That seems okay. We could have even considered not playing anything and then hoping our opponent attacks us with Gideon to grow our Death Shadows. But that might be a little too ambitious. Opponent with Islands and a 4-drop. Sorin, Solemn Visitor, interesting, so not going for Lingering Souls first. And Sorin is a nice combo with Lingering Souls. So they're just making a Vampire and then probably plussing Gideon on one of our Death Shadows. That's okay. So let's untap, find Bloodstained Mire, excellent. So now we can pressure one of the opponent's Planeswalkers with Death Shadow. I think we attack Sorin here, but it's probably not gonna matter since our opponent can just block with their Vampire token. Could have also considered not playing out the Bloodstained Mire, then our opponent perhaps doesn't block and we can either Mutagenic Growth or Surgical. Our opponent is indeed blocking with the Vampire, so let's Fetch Shock. Grow our Death Shadow some more. And take out the Vampire. And then if our opponent doesn't find an untapped land, we can actually Surgical the Lingering Souls. Since we know they have a Darkslick Shore which enters the battlefield tapped. But they did find a Godless Shrine which they can play, so they can actually cast and flashback Lingering Souls. And we never get the opportunity to Surgical it from the graveyard. So that's unfortunate here. So they do get to flashback Lingering Souls. And now they're gonna plus Sorin, making a whole bunch of life-linking spirit tokens. Gideon's gonna plus on Death Shadow. So now we need to find something pretty powerful to get us out of this. Another Mutagenic Growth is probably not gonna do it. Technically we can kill our opponent with this one Death Shadow. So I guess we can try. But our opponent's probably gonna block with some spirit tokens here. Alright, our opponent did not block. So I guess we're just gonna go for it here. Mutagenic, pay 2 life. Mutagenic, pay 2 life. And Tainted Strike. And that's lethal. Opponent probably did not expect that. We could have even Surgicaled them, but then they probably would have conceded in response. So maybe should have Surgicaled them and then gone for the Infect kill. But we can probably expect some sort of Esper Planeswalker deck here with Lingering Souls, in which case Pyroclasm does clear up Lingering Souls nicely. Duress is probably worth it to take Planeswalkers or removal spells. Probably don't need Dismember, even though it does answer Gideon. Postmortem Lunge could be okay. It's kind of bad against Path to Exile, since they can just exile your creatures. So I think that's all we really want. Get to take out 2 more cards, probably just gonna shave some Tainted Strikes here. And try it like this. And that's of course one of the advantages of playing an unknown deck like this one, is that your opponents don't know whether or not they should be blocking your Death Shadow when they're still at 17. This hand looks like a keep. Got 3 creatures, which is nice against a removal heavy deck. Opponent's gonna lead with a tapped Godless Shrine. We're just gonna Fetch Shock and play out Nivmagus Elemental. Say go. Perhaps overboarded a little bit since don't want to have too many Pyroclasms, but if our opponent is playing Sorin, it's also likely they have access to multiple token generators, so it's probably still okay. I think we just attack for 1 and then play out a Kiln Fiend. Let's fetch Shock once again. Say go. So if your opponent does play Lingering Souls, it's a little awkward that Pyroclasm kills their own Kiln Fiend. Instead they're just gonna Fatal Push it, that's fine. We do have a pretty threat-dense hand, so we can definitely beat 1 or 2 removal spells here. We would not mind seeing Lingering Souls here. Opponent to 14. And there's Lingering Souls. We do even have the option of casting Surgical Extraction, but probably don't even need to. So let's untap, find a Thoughtseize, interesting. So now we actually have the option of Thoughtseizing our opponents. Then we can cast Death Shadow, Surgical, and then Ground Rift. Or this turn we can simply Thoughtseize and cast Death Shadow, and then next turn go for the Pyroclasm plus maybe Ground Rift. Don't mind that actually. So let's lead with the Thoughtseize, which we're just gonna cast just to see what's up. And we see Path to Exile and Supreme Verdict. Alright, that's not what we wanted to see here. Since if we take the Supreme Verdict, our opponent still has a path to answer Nivmagus. If we take the path and we run out Death Shadow and our opponent top decks a land, then we're in serious trouble. I think we do take the path. Leave our opponent with Supreme Verdict. Then we might just wanna hold on to our Death Shadow for now. So let's run out Bloodstained Mire. And I think we just say go here. Don't even wanna attack with the Nivmagus. And then we're hoping our opponent flashes back Lingering Souls. Of course, the best case scenario, our opponent doesn't find a 4th land, we can run out Death Shadow and just kill our opponent next turn, but that's pretty risky if our opponent does find a land, so they're flashing back Lingering Souls. So now our Pyroclasm looks very good. Opponent's hitting us for 2. And let's just fetch, and I think we shock as well. To 7, and then untap. Find another Bloodstained Mire, so we can Surgical the path, exile it with Nivmagus Elemental, then Pyroclasm, and then Ground Rift. And then we have a pretty big threat in Nivmagus, and then we can keep the Death Shadow in hand as a follow-up. Let's Surgical the path to exile, paying 2 life, and then we're just gonna exile it with Nivmagus. And then we're just gonna Pyroclasm. Let that resolve. And then I think we Ground Rift just to pump up our Nivmagus. Exile. 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 And then attack for 9. And then say go. And see if they can find land number 4. They do. It's Hallowed Fountain, so they have to shock down to 3 if they want a Supreme Verdict. And then we get to follow up with Death Shadow, which hopefully is good enough here. And Temur Battle Rage means that even if they find another Lingering Souls, that's not good enough. And that does it, sweet, managed to beat Esper Control. Onto the next one. Alright, we're on the play. And this hand looks pretty good, so we'll keep. And we have a turn 1 Nivmagus into a bunch of Death Shadows on 2 perhaps. So let's run out Arid Mesa, since Marsh Flats can get a swamp and Arid Mesa cannot. And then get our Blood Crypt. Run out Nivmagus, say go. And see what our opponent is up to. Forest into Birds of Paradise. So we could even Gutshot the Birds of Paradise here, which is pretty funny. So we can Fat Shock to 14, Gutshot the Birds of Paradise, and play 2 Death Shadows. That is pretty appealing actually. And then just attack for 1 with Nivmagus, or we can Surgical the birds and then exile it to the Nivmagus and attack for 3. Yeah, I kinda like going all in here. So let's Fat Shock. Then Gutshot the Birds of Paradise, paying 2 life. Let that resolve. Then Surgical the birds, paying 2 life. And we're gonna exile that with our Nivmagus, so it's not actually gonna resolve. Attack for 3. Put our opponent to 17. And play 2 Death Shadows. And next turn we have the Fetch land to grow them even more. So not a bad turn 2. And say go. Opponent with Stomping Ground. And are they gonna take 2? No, just a tap Stomping Ground into Oath of Nissa. So opponent doesn't have anything in play. Oath of Nissa could indicate that this is the Sahili combo deck, as they find Birds of Paradise with Oath. And another fetch land means we just get to Fetch Shock here. To 7. And attack for 15. So had they taken the 2 damage from Stomping Ground, they would have been dead here. Say go, and hope we get there next turn. Opponent fetches a Forests. And is this a Kitchen Finks? No, Nissa Voice of Zendikar can make a plant token, but that's not gonna be good enough. Alright, on to sideboarding. So we did see Nissa Voice of Zendikar, we saw Birds of Paradise, so I kind of like Pyroclasm against this deck. Do we want anything else? I don't think so. What do we take out is the question. Maybe we shave some number of Tainted Strike, since our opponent is taking some damage from their mana base if they're a color intensive deck. And then I would rather just deal damage to them and kill with the Temur Battle Rage instead. And then I guess we can shave 1 Apostle's Blessing, since our opponent's not going to be packing too much removal. And try something like this. This hand is not that great. We have 4 lands and a Death Shadow. We can protect our Death Shadow, but still pretty light on action here. With 4 lands, I think we can do better. And this one doesn't have a creature in it, so probably cannot keep this one either. And alright, I guess we'll keep this, and Pyroclasm is a kind of card that can catch you back up when you're behind. Thoughtseize is appealing, but I actually don't think we want it, so let's put that on the bottom. Opponent fetches for a Forest and Arbor Elf. Alright, we found a Death Shadow. I think we just Fat Shock for Blood Crypt, and if our opponent has Blood Moon, I guess they have Blood Moon. Take 2, run out Nivmagus. At least we still get to cast most of our spells, since they're either free or red. We just don't get to cast our Death Shadow. If our opponent tries to bolt Nivmagus, we can put 2 counters on it with Mutagenic Growth. So we're just hoping our opponent plays a bunch of mana dorks here that we can kill with Pyroclasm. Sylvan Caryatid does not die to Pyroclasm, unfortunately. And Nykthos means that they're probably on a Devotion type deck. Alright, Birds of Paradise is actually not a bad one to see here. So what we could actually do is attack with Nivmagus, hope our opponent blocks with the Sylvan Caryatid, and then get them with Pyroclasm. So let's see if our opponent falls for it. Attack with Nivmagus. Do they block? They're just gonna take the 1. Alright, so do we want to Pyroclasm here is the question. So perhaps we should have cast our Mutagenic Growth right there, since if our plan was to Pyroclasm we need to do that anyways, and then we missed out on 2 damage. So perhaps a small misstep. But I think we still do it now, since we don't have any other great options. So let's cast Mutagenic Growth. Paying 2 life. And then exile it with Nivmagus. And then Pyroclasm. So yeah, we should have dealt 2 more damage to our opponent here. Opponent with a Dismember. Yeah, that's gonna work. It's actually a little risky on their part, since if we had another Phyrexian mana spell, it wouldn't actually work. But they probably don't know our deck list, so that's understandable. So now we need to find a way to deal some damage, so we can run out Death Shadow. Bloodstained Mire works. Let's get a Blood Crypt. Run out Death Shadow. And this Tainted Strike is looking pretty bad here. But maybe if we can combine it with a Temur Battle Rage and maybe find some more fetch lands along the way, then maybe Death Shadow can kill them in 1 hit with Infect. They're taking 2 from Stomping Ground. And Xenagos, the Reveler, can make a 2/2 token. But it's gonna stay on defense. And we found a Dismember, that's interesting, so now we can deal 4 damage to ourselves, go to 6. Death Shadow 7/7, and that's almost enough to kill our opponent. With the Tainted Strike, but not quite. And then the question is, do we go for our opponent's Planeswalker or their life total? We're probably better off killing the Planeswalker. So let's Dismember the Satyr. Paying all the life. And then see if we can take out Xenagos. Since the problem with leaving our opponent with Xenagos is that they make a chum blocker every turn, so might as well take him out first. Our opponent does have a few turns here thanks to the Caryatid, but Gutshot might be able to take them by surprise here, since Gutshot plus Tainted Strike is lethal. So if they don't block, they're actually dead. So they're not blocking, so we can Gutshot either our opponent or ourselves. I think we're just Gutshotting ourselves for style points. Pay 2 life and then Tainted Strike. And hope our opponent doesn't have a removal spell. And they did not. Awesome, managed to get there with our Shadow Elemental deck. Even pulled off a few turn 2 and 3 kills. So very happy with the result. I wanna thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed. And as always, have a nice day. I also want to thank all my patrons for supporting the channel, and you can do so yourself as well over at patreon.com/LegenVD, where you get cool rewards for supporting the channel, as well as getting us closer to our goals, where with every goal reached we will release an additional weekly series. So if you want to see more content, Patreon is the place to go.